On February 7, 2025, a 44-year-old construction worker named Rafael Dominguez pressed his buzzer on the Family Feud stage and wrote an answer on the screen that Steve Harvey read silently, then refused to say out loud. The question was, "Name something you'd do anything to get back." The board expected answers like youth and an ex and money. Rafael had written, "My son's last voicemail. I accidentally deleted it." Steve read the screen. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He read it again. His hand came up and pressed flat against the monitor as if he were trying to reach through the glass and retrieve something that wasn't there anymore. Then he set the reading card face down on the podium, turned to Rafael and said, "I'm not reading that out loud." Rafael's face tightened. He thought he'd done something wrong. He started to apologize. Steve held up his hand and said, "No, you don't understand. I'm not reading it because I'm going to need you to tell me yourself. Because that answer isn't for the board. That answer is for this room." The studio fell completely silent. 219 audience members sat motionless. A floor director in the wings lowered her clipboard to her side, and Rafael Dominguez, 6'1", 230 pounds, hands scarred from 22 years of rebar and concrete, stood behind the Family Feud podium and began to shake. It was a Friday in Atlanta, cold enough that the crew had been drinking coffee in the parking lot before doors opened. The Dominguez family, Rafael, his wife Elena, his mother Lucia, his brother Tomas, and his niece Sofia, stood behind the right podium. They were from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Rafael wore a blue button-down shirt that Elena had ironed that morning in the hotel room while he sat on the edge of the bed staring at his phone the way he did every morning, scrolling to a blank space in his voicemail folder where a recording used to be. Across from them, the Patterson family from Charlotte, North Carolina, 2 sisters, their husbands, and their mother, a 68-year-old retired postal worker named Charlene, who had told the warm-up comedian she planned to win enough money to finally visit Paris. The buzzers were set, the lights were steady, and in Rafael's left pocket, folded into a square no bigger than a matchbook, was a piece of notebook paper with a phone number written on it, a number that no longer worked, hadn't worked in 3 years, but that Rafael called every Sunday at noon just to hear the automated message that told him the line was disconnected. But nobody in that studio knew what was about to happen. Rafael Dominguez was 19 years old when his son Mateo was born on June 11, 2001, at Presbyterian Hospital in Albuquerque. Rafael had dropped out of high school at 17 to work construction with his uncle Hector. He was making $9.40 an hour framing houses in the South Valley when Mateo's mother, a 19-year-old named Gabriela Rios, told him she was pregnant. They were not together. They had dated for 3 months and broken up before she knew. When Gabriela told him, Rafael was standing in his uncle's driveway with drywall dust on his boots. He was terrified. He was broke. He was a teenager who could barely take care of himself. He looked at Gabriela and said, "I don't know how to be a father." She said, "Nobody does until they are one." He said, "Then I'm going to figure it out." He did not figure it out quickly. Rafael and Gabriela never got back together, but they shared custody of Mateo without lawyers, without courts, without a single formal agreement. Gabriela had Mateo during the week. Rafael had him on weekends. Every Friday at 5 p.m., Rafael would pull up to Gabriela's apartment in his uncle's truck, with the windows that didn't roll up, and Mateo would come running out the door with his backpack dragging on the ground. Rafael taught him to fish at Cochiti Lake. He taught him to throw a football in the dirt lot behind the apartment complex where he rented a studio. He taught him to build a birdhouse using scrap wood from job sites. He was not a perfect father. He drank too much in his 20s. He missed a child support payment in 2007 and another in 2009. He showed up late to a school play once because traffic on I-25 backed up and he didn't leave early enough. Mateo sat on the stage afterward in his pilgrim costume and said, "You missed my part, Dad." Raphael said, "I know. I'm sorry." Mateo said, "It's okay. I was the best pilgrim anyway." They got ice cream. Raphael never showed up late again. In 2015, when Mateo was 14, Gabriela was diagnosed with lupus. The disease moved fast. Within 2 years, she could no longer work. Raphael increased his child support voluntarily. No judge asked him to. He picked up extra shifts, working 6 days a week on commercial builds in the Mesa del Sol development. He drove Mateo to school every morning before clocking in at 6:30 a.m. When Gabriela was hospitalized for 3 weeks in 2017, Raphael took Mateo full-time without being asked. Mateo slept in Raphael's studio apartment on an air mattress beside his father's bed, and every night Raphael would say, "Your mom's going to be fine." Mateo would say, "I know, Dad." And that wasn't even the part that made Steve cry. Mateo graduated from El Dorado High School in 2019. He was funny, sharply, devastatingly funny, the kind of kid who could make a teacher laugh during a lecture and somehow not get in trouble because even the teacher knew the joke was better than the lesson. He worked at a tire shop after school. He wanted to save money for community college. He wanted to study something with computers. He wasn't sure what yet, but he knew he didn't want to carry rebar for the rest of his life. And Raphael told him every chance he got, "You're going to do better than me, mijo. You're going to work with your brain instead of your back." Mateo would grin and say, "My brain and my back, Dad. Why not both?" On March 3, 2022, at 7:14 p.m., Mateo Dominguez was driving home from the tire shop on Tramway Boulevard when a driver in a stolen SUV ran a red light at the intersection of Tramway and Candelaria. The SUV hit Mateo's car on the driver's side at 58 miles per hour. Mateo was 20 years old. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Raphael was at home when the call came. He was heating up leftover enchiladas in the microwave. His phone rang. A number he didn't recognize. A woman's voice, official, careful, every word selected to minimize damage, as if language could do that. Raphael listened. He set the phone on the counter. He turned off the microwave. He walked to the front door of his apartment, opened it, stepped outside into the March air, sat down on the concrete step, and did not go back inside for 4 hours. Elena, his wife of 2 years, his second partner, a woman who had loved Mateo as if he were her own, found him at 11 p.m. sitting in the dark with his hands between his knees. She didn't ask what happened. She saw his face, and she knew. Mateo had left Raphael a voicemail at 6:47 p.m. that day, 27 minutes before the accident. Raphael hadn't answered because he was in the shower. The voicemail was 11 seconds long. In it, Mateo said, "Hey Dad, just leaving work. I'm gonna swing by Gabriela's to check on Mom. Then I'll come by for dinner. Save me some enchiladas. Love you." Raphael listened to that voicemail every single day for 14 months. Every morning. Sometimes twice. Sometimes at 2 a.m. when he couldn't sleep, and the apartment was too quiet, and the only thing that made the silence bearable was his son's voice telling him to save some enchiladas. On May 19, 2023, Raphael's phone updated overnight. He woke up, opened his voicemail, and the message was gone. Deleted during the system update. He called his carrier, spent 4 hours on the phone, escalated 3 times, filed a recovery request, filed a second one. was told the voicemail server had been purged during a system migration, and the file was unrecoverable. The representative said, "I'm sorry, sir, there's nothing we can do." Raphael hung up, walked to the bathroom, gripped the edge of the sink, and stared at his reflection until Elena knocked on the door 30 minutes later. He told her he was fine. He wasn't fine. The last trace of his son's living voice had been erased by a software update, and no amount of construction work, or overtime, or endurance could build it back. He told no one. He told Elena the voicemail was still there. He told Lucia he listened to it every morning. He told Tomas he was doing better. Every Sunday at noon, he called Mateo's old cell phone number, the one that had been deactivated and reassigned to no one, and listened to the automated recording that said the number was no longer in service. He called it because dialing the number was the closest he could get to reaching for his son. The audience thought that was the peak. They were wrong. In October 2024, Elena submitted the Dominguez family to Family Feud. She thought it would be good for Raphael, a reason to smile, a break from the routine of work and silence and Sunday phone calls to a dead line. She told him it was just for fun. She told him Lucia was excited. She told him Sofia, Tomas's 16-year-old daughter, who had adored Mateo and worn his old tire shop jacket every day for a year after his death, really wanted to go. Raphael said yes because he didn't know how to explain that fun wasn't something he knew how to do anymore. What Elena did not tell Raphael, what she had been working on for 5 months, was that she had tracked down the voicemail. She had contacted the phone carrier's corporate office, filed a formal data recovery petition, been denied, appealed, been denied again, and then written a letter to the company's chief technology officer explaining who Mateo was, how he died, what the voicemail said, and what it meant. The letter was 4 pages long. The CTO's assistant read it. The CTO read it. A senior engineer in the company's data recovery division was assigned to search deep archive backups, server images that had been stored offline before the migration. It took 3 months. On January 30th, 2025, 8 days before the taping, Elena received an email with a single audio file attached, 11 seconds long. A 20-year-old boy's voice saying, "Hey Dad, just leaving work." Elena played it once, in her car in the parking lot of the grocery store, and she sobbed so hard she set off her steering wheel horn. She called the Family Feud production office that afternoon and told them everything. A producer named Marcus Webb walked the audio file to Steve Harvey's dressing room on a USB drive. Steve plugged it into his laptop, pressed play, and listened to an 11-second voicemail from a dead boy to his father. He sat in his chair for a long time after it ended. Then he said, "He's going to hear his son's voice on my stage." Steve would later call what happened next the most important moment of his career. The game was in the second round. The Dominguez family was tied with the Pattersons, 132 to 132. Raphael had been quiet, answering competently, smiling when the audience clapped, but with the mechanical quality of a man who had agreed to be present without agreeing to be available. Steve had noticed. During the commercial break, he'd leaned over to a producer and said, "Something's going on with him. Watch." The question came up. "Name something you'd do anything to get back." Raphael pressed the buzzer. The screen waited for his answer. He typed it out on the electronic display. Steve read it to himself. He read it again. He turned away from the camera, pressing his hand against the monitor. His mouth moved around words that wouldn't form. When he turned back, his eyes were red at the edges. "I'm not reading that out loud." Raphael's face fell. "I'm sorry, did I?" "No." Steve held up his hand. The authority in his voice silenced the room. "You didn't do anything wrong. I'm not reading it because this isn't an answer for a game show. This is something this room needs to hear from you." He walked around the podium. He stood beside Raphael. He put the microphone between them. "Tell them, Raphael. Tell them what you wrote." Raphael swallowed. His scarred hands gripped the podium edge. He looked at the audience. 219 strangers staring back at him, and he said, in a voice that came out in pieces, "My son Matteo left me a voicemail the day he died. 11 seconds, just telling me to save him some dinner." He paused, his jaw clenched. "A phone update deleted it. I've been trying to get it back for 2 years. I can't." The studio fell completely silent. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. She turned to Lucia. Lucia stared at her son with an expression that rearranged her entire face. She hadn't known. He had told her he still had it. He had lied to his own mother to spare her the grief of knowing the last scrap of her grandson's voice was gone. "Raphael," Steve said. His voice had dropped to a register the microphones barely caught. "How long have you been calling his old number?" Raphael's eyes went wide. He hadn't told anyone. He looked at Steve as if the man had reached into his chest and read something written on the inside of his ribs. "Every Sunday," Raphael whispered. "Every Sunday at noon, just to dial the number." "What does it say when you call?" "It says the number is no longer in service." "And you call anyway?" "Yes, sir, because dialing it is the closest I get to reaching for him." A sound came from the audience. Not a gasp, not a cry, but a collective exhale, as if 200 people had been holding the same breath and released it at the same moment. Steve's chin dropped to his chest. He squeezed the bridge of his nose. His shoulders rose once, held, and fell. "Let me tell you something, Raphael." Steve's voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I know what it means to dial a number that nobody answers." He paused. 29 years ago, I had nothing. I was sleeping in my car, a 1976 Ford Tempo, for 3 years. No one called me. No one checked on me. I would sit in that car at night and hold my phone and think about calling somebody, anybody, just to hear a voice. But I didn't have anyone to call. He looked at Raphael. "You had someone. You had a son who called you on his way home from work, just to say, 'Save me some dinner.' That's not a voicemail, Raphael, that's proof. Proof that you were the person he wanted to talk to at the end of his day." Raphael's composure broke. Not visibly at first. His face stayed locked. But his hands released the podium and hung at his sides, and his shoulders rounded forward, and his chin trembled in a way that only Elena, standing 3 feet behind him, could see. But Steve wasn't done. He looked at Elena. She was crying silently, both hands pressed against her mouth, shaking her head slowly. Steve said, "Elena." She looked up. "You've been keeping a secret." Raphael turned to his wife. Confusion moved across his face, then something closer to fear. Elena reached for his hand. Her fingers were trembling. Steve said, "Elena spent 5 months tracking down that voicemail. She contacted your phone carrier. She was denied twice. She wrote a 4-page letter to the chief technology officer. And 8 days ago, a senior engineer recovered an audio file from a deep archive backup." Raphael stopped breathing. His chest froze mid-inhale. His mouth opened and no sound came out. "Your son's voicemail exists, Raphael. It was recovered. And it's here." Raphael's knees buckled. Tomas lunged forward and caught him under the arms. Lucia pressed both hands against her face. Sophia, 16 years old, wearing Matteo's tire shop jacket with the sleeves rolled up 3 times, grabbed the podium and said something in Spanish that the microphones picked up as, "Dios mío! Dios mío!" Steve nodded to the sound booth, and through the studio speakers, filling the room from floor to ceiling, came the voice of Mateo Dominguez. "Hey, Dad, just leaving work. I'm gonna swing by Gabriella's to check on Mom, then I'll come by for dinner. Save me some enchiladas. Love you." 11 seconds. Rafael collapsed against his brother, not downward, forward, into Tomas, his face pressed into his brother's shoulder, his hands gripping the back of Tomas's shirt so hard the fabric tore at the seam. The sound that came from Rafael was not crying. It was something beneath crying, something structural. As if a wall he had been holding up for 3 years had come down all at once, and the weight of everything behind it, every Sunday phone call, every blank space in his voicemail folder, every lie about being fine, hit the floor of that stage simultaneously. The studio fell completely silent. Steve said, "Play it again." They played it again. Mateo's voice filled the room a second time. And this time, Rafael lifted his head. He stood up straight. He closed his eyes. And he listened the way a man listens to rain after a drought, with his whole body, with every surface of himself turned toward the sound, trying to absorb it before it stopped. "Save me some enchiladas. Love you." A cameraman on the left side of the stage was kneeling on the floor with his hand over his eyes. A production assistant in the wings had her back against the wall, sliding down to the ground. Charlene Patterson, the 68-year-old from Charlotte who wanted to go to Paris, was standing at her podium with tears streaming silently down her face, both hands clasped in front of her chest. When the voicemail ended the second time, Steve walked to Rafael and put his hands on both of his shoulders. "That voicemail is yours, on a USB drive, backed up in 3 locations. Your carrier has guaranteed permanent archival. You will never lose his voice again." Rafael reached out and pulled Steve into an embrace. Steve, who never let contestants hold him for more than a few seconds, who always controlled the pace and the distance, did not move. He stood there and let Rafael hold him for 23 seconds while 219 people watched, and the cameras rolled, and nobody in the building pretended this was a game show anymore. But Steve wasn't done. He turned to the Pattersons. Charlene was already nodding. "Mr. Harvey," she said, "I can see Paris in a magazine. Give that family whatever they need." Her daughters laughed through their tears. Their husbands applauded. Steve turned to the camera. "Stop everything." No one in the booth responded. No one tried. "This has never happened in 27 years of this show." He pulled out his phone and dialed. The speakers carried the ring. A woman's voice answered, tentative, breathy, fragile. Gabriela Rios, Mateo's mother. She was calling from Albuquerque, where she was still managing her lupus, still living in the apartment where Mateo had grown up, still keeping his room exactly as he'd left it. "Gabriela," Steve said, "your son's voicemail has been found." Rafael just heard it. "And I need you to hear it too." Steve nodded to the booth. They played it a third time. "Hey, Dad, just leaving work. I'm gonna swing by Gabriela's to check on Mom. Then I'll come by for dinner. Save me some enchiladas. Love you." Gabriela screamed, a sharp, bright sound that cut through the speakers and made the audience flinch. Not in pain, but in recognition. Because she heard what everyone heard. Mateo was going to check on her. The last errand of his life was driving to see his mother. The last plan he made was making sure she was okay. "He was coming to me," Gabriela said through the phone. "He was on his way to me." Rafael nodded. His face was destroyed. Elena held his hand with both of hers. "He was always on his way to both of you," Steve said quietly. "That's who he was." But Steve wasn't done. "The Patterson family's $20,000 prize goes to the Dominguez family," he said. "But my foundation is also doing something that should have been done a long time ago. We are establishing the Mateo Dominguez Memorial Voice Project, a partnership with 3 major telecommunications carriers to create permanent protected archives for voicemails flagged by families of deceased loved ones. No more system purges, no more lost files. If someone you love is gone and their voice is the last thing you have, that voice will be protected. He looked into the camera. Everyone watching at home, if you have a voicemail from someone who's gone, your mother, your father, your child, your best friend, save it tonight. Back it up. Email it to yourself. Put it on a flash drive. Put it in a safe. Because the technology that stored it doesn't care about it the way you do. And one update, one migration, one glitch, and it's gone. Don't wait. Do it tonight. The audience rose. Charlene Patterson crossed the stage and took Lucia's hands. The Patterson sons-in-law shook Tomas's hand. Sophia, still wearing Mateo's jacket, walked to Steve, reached into the jacket pocket, and pulled out a photograph, a picture of Mateo at 17, grinning in the tire shop with a wrench in his hand and grease on his forehead. She handed it to Steve. He looked at it for a long time. Then he turned it toward the camera and said, "This is Mateo Dominguez. He was 20 years old. He worked at a tire shop. He loved his mother. He loved his father. And the last thing he ever said was, 'Save me some enchiladas.' Remember him." The clip went live at 9 p.m. on February 7, 2025. By Wednesday, it had 438 million views. The 11-second voicemail, played 3 times on stage, became the most listened-to audio clip on the internet for 30 consecutive days. The hashtag #SaveMeSomeEnchiladas trended in 49 countries. A secondary hashtag, #SaveTheirVoice, was adopted by digital preservation organizations worldwide and prompted 3 major carriers to announce voicemail protection programs within 60 days of the episode airing. The moment Steve refused to read the answer, pressing his hand against the monitor, turning away from the camera, was replayed 290 million times as a standalone clip. The Mateo Dominguez Memorial Voice Project launched in April 2025 with $600,000 in initial funding and partnerships with 4 telecommunications companies. In its first year, the project permanently archived 42,000 voicemail recordings flagged by grieving families. Each archived file was stored in 3 separate facilities. Each family received a USB drive, a digital backup, and a written guarantee of permanent preservation. Raphael was present at the launch event. He spoke for 90 seconds. He said, "My son called me to tell me to save him some dinner. I didn't pick up. I was in the shower. I will never not pick up again. And I need everyone in this room to go home tonight and answer the phone. Even if you're tired, even if it's not a good time, even if you think they'll call back, answer it. Because sometimes they don't call back." Gabriella's lupus stabilized in 2025 with new treatment covered by a medical fund the Harvey Foundation established alongside the Voice Project. She visited the Family Feud studio in June. Steve gave her a personal tour. She stood at the podium where Raphael had stood and pressed her hand against the buzzer and closed her eyes. She didn't press it. She just touched it. In September 2025, on what would have been Mateo's 24th birthday, Raphael and Elena and Gabriella and Lucia and Tomas and Sophia drove to Cochiti Lake, the lake where Raphael had taught Mateo to fish. They sat on the bank. They played the voicemail on a portable speaker. Mateo's voice moved across the water, mixing with the wind and the sound of small waves against the rocks. They sat there for 2 hours. Nobody spoke much. Sophia wore the tire shop jacket. Lucia held a plate of enchiladas she had made that morning, using Mateo's favorite recipe, the one with green chili and extra cheese. She set the plate on a flat rock by the water's edge. "Save me some enchiladas," she said, and laughed and cried, and both things were true at the same time. Rafael Dominguez no longer calls Mateo's old phone number on Sundays. He doesn't need to. Every Sunday at noon, he sits in the living room of the house in Albuquerque, takes out the USB drive the show gave him, plugs it into a small speaker Elena bought him for Father's Day, and plays his son's voice. 11 seconds. Then he plays it again. Then he sits in the quiet and lets the room fill back up with everything else. Elena in the kitchen, Lucia on the phone with Tomas, Sofia texting from the couch, the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of a Sunday that keeps going because the people in it keep showing up for each other. The voicemail is on the drive is on the shelf, and the boy's voice, steady, easy, alive with the ordinary weight of a Tuesday evening plan, is exactly where it belongs, not in a phone system, not in a server, in a room full of people who will never let it disappear again. A man pressed a buzzer on a game show stage and typed an answer that a host refused to read, and in the silence between the screen and the speaking of it, a room full of strangers learned something they already knew but had forgotten: that the voices we lose don't vanish because they weren't important. They vanish because the systems that hold them don't understand what they're holding. And sometimes it takes a construction worker with scarred hands, and a wife who wouldn't stop writing letters, and a dead boy's 11-second goodbye to remind the rest of us. Answer the phone. Save the message. Hold on to the voice. Because the voice is the person, and the person is everything. If you're still watching, you already know what this channel does. We find these stories every week, the ones that stop you in the middle of your day and make you call someone you haven't called in too long. Subscribe right now, turn on the bell, and send this video to someone whose voice you'd do anything to hear one more time. Do it now. Don't wait.